It is now 9:03 a.m. I'll call the meeting to order since the quorum is present. Can we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Before we get started, we do have a couple of new faces at the table. Our new county judge, which he stepped away. He was at the table. He's getting coffee. If you leave your seat, you're going to lose it because there's a lot of people coming in.
We have more.
Our recently appointed county judge, Ruben Vogt.
Good morning, everybody. Morning. Appreciate it.
And another lawyer at the table, which I always like. So, Scott, we have our new counsel, Scott Foster. We discussed him at the last meeting, but here he is, sitting with us. So, if you want to blame anyone for anything, you start down there. A couple of reminders, or actually a couple of reminders. Our training and absence policy that we enacted, so it resets. We reset October 1. So that's why we had a training this morning. So you've got a head start. We're going to do trainings in November and December as well to help out here. And then you'll have to do some of that on your own elsewhere as usual. And the deadline is the end of January,
It'll
right?
be January 28th.
There you go. So plenty of notice. Yes, sir, Dr. No.
Do we have a sign-in sheet for this training?
I did note you down. I was keeping track of the members. Yes, sir.
Did you get, besides Dr. No, did you get everybody else?
No. Anybody else? He was asking about everybody else.
Oh, okay.
I said
He
all
was
members.
here.
Okay, great. And if you need help locating those resources that you can study outside this room, there's a lot of stuff on the web that you can watch videos. You got to keep tabs on what you're doing and submit it to the staff so they give you credit for that. So you got plenty of time. You have 4 months from essentially 4 months from now. Well, about 3.5 months from now.
Remind everyone how many hours.
What is it? A total of
5 hours.
total of 5
and
between
then-
now and then.
Sorry, thanks.
Sorry. So you gotta keep up with that so you keep your voting privileges here. Also, your absences have reset as of October 1. With that being said, also we have Genevieve Bales of FHWA is present at the meeting.
Yes, sir.
She
She is in the audience.
Okay, physically present. Great. All right. So you want to do open comment? at
We
this
have
point?
Mr. Mike Rooney for open public comment.
For items 3, 4, and 5,
Oh.
please call me when those are discussed.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We'll move to item 1.
Item number 1 is discussion action to approve the minutes for the August 18th Transportation Policy Board meeting with, I need to note that I need to make correction on item number 4. When we did the appointment of the executive committee members, I had left fiscal year 16 and 17, and it should read 17, 18. So I need it with the floor amendment, please.
So with the floor amendment, Mayor Margot and Mayor Miller, motion and second. Do you have any discussion on the item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Item 2.
Item number 2 is discussion and action to approve the 2018 Transportation Policy Board meeting dates.
Has everybody had a chance to review the proposed dates?
Move to approve.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the proposed meeting dates. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries.
Item number
Item 3, please.
Item number 3 is the Destino 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Development Report.
Good morning, everybody. Roger Williams with the El Paso EPMPO. I'm going to go ahead and take us through the report today, starting with the report that was provided to the EC. The EC gets a report every 2 weeks from the MPO on the status of the development of the Destino 2045 MTP. So this report has changed just a little bit. It's been updated. The item number 1, first of all, let me let you know that Alliance Transportation Group is going to join us here on the phone so that if any questions come up, they can help us with answering those. I think we're trying to hook them up as we speak. So item number one is concerning the network for the model, and it's the 2012 base year network, so it's a starting point, if you will. It's also important to mention that the model has been in development for over a year now, and another consultant, Cambridge Systematics, has helped us in developing that model. It's still being worked on, so in parallel with the development of the actual document for the 2045 MTP is the development of the model. And the 2012 base year has also got the existing plus the committed. That's what the E plus C is. So we have a starting point, if you will, with the development of the model that's going to be used for the MTP. And what this item was concerning was that we wanted to have Alliance Transportation Group to come in and provide some assistance in the review of that base year. The one thing we don't want to find is that we have to go back after we've gone through the process of having the TPB approve the plan and we're getting federal review and we find problems in the model. So Cambridge developed the model, and we've had some QA/QC work already on that model, but we're bringing Alliance in to do additional QA/QC. They have delivered the initial report, and there's still work that they're doing. They're still, and probably with a few more days' work, they'll have that completed. So then item number two, the needs assessment, we're looking at all of the elements to include roadway, transit, safety, ports of entry, freight, active transportation, operations, maintenance, interregional passenger transportation, so on. There's a lot of things that we look at in the needs assessment, and Alliance is working on the actual needs assessment and have delivered and still is a work in progress, but we have a lot of those elements now, with the exception of the transit final version will be to come, and as well as the active transportation. So the MPO has, moving on down, we're still on item 2. The MPO has developed under 2A a matrix, if you will, and in coordination with Alliance, to look at all of the performance measures, the measures that were approved by the policy board a couple of months ago. This satisfies the federal requirements to do performance-based planning. So in this plan, for the first time, well, all MPOs are now tasked with having to demonstrate a performance-based plan. So we have moved forward, moving on to now number 3 in the coding of the, I'm sorry.
Real quick. The performance measures that we reviewed a couple months ago, there was quite a bit of discussion about
Yes, sir.
those. And I think kind of, maybe not amending, but being more specific in some of our goals there. Has that been rolled into what we're doing going forward? Based on that discussion that we had?
Yes, sir. We wanted to move some things out of quality of life and up into other areas, and we have done that. We also wanted to demonstrate at the ports of entry the congestion for pedestrian movements. That one's actually, now we're looking at it at the average wait times by mode at the ports of entry. But these are, yes, those performance measures that were the Transportation Policy Board wanted us to make a few modifications.
So the discussion that we had and those changes, and I think Representative Sparsman was part of that conversation, so those have been integrated into what we're doing going forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So now the MPO has been working on developing the alternatives for the plan, and in this, what we're doing is we're coding for the future. So as we talked about a while ago, we have a base year, and that gives us a starting point. And now that we have developed future forecast years that have the demographics on those forecast years, and now we have to go back and develop alternatives to present projects, if you will. So we'll be able to look at, with the performance measures, we'll be able to look at the difference between if we have a no-build scenario out to the horizon year of this plan is 2045. And then we'll be able to look at the performance of projects, if you will, once we put those on the network. So we have a 2020, a 2030, a 2040, and a 2045. Those are the network years. At this point, though, there's still some question about those being the final networks, especially when it comes to 2020. And I'll get into that in a little bit, with a little bit more detail. So the item number 4 here was the preparing for the open house. We've already had public involvement. We had a round of public involvement in May. We held several meetings region-wide, and we have more public involvement coming up even before we do the final required 30-day public involvement that federal highway mandates that we have to do. Yes, sir.
On the public involvement, it's been a while since I've gone to one. I've had time to go to the library. What are you presenting at the public involvement? Is it a real technical presentation? Do you have maps? Are you showing some of the, to me, I think the most important is the added capacity projects that are in the MTP. Does the public get to see where we're talking about doing Northeast Parkway or the freeway section of Montana? Do they get to see any of that?
In the early round, that was not what was presented. Now, we have to, let me back up for a moment. This plan is starting from scratch, if you will. We haven't gone out and told them, here are the projects. What we've done, the first one was we're gathering information from the public on what you feel the needs are, where do you feel the growth is going to be. We do have maps. We have maps out there, and we also have them actively involved in that, where they're putting on those maps what they believe are the issues and where they think the needs are going to be. So then we're gathering the information back from them so that we can hear what the public is telling us. So that then what we'll do is we move forward with these alternatives. We'll be going back out to the public to let them know, here are the projects now. So this particular open house that we're talking about will be a web-based open house where what we're doing at this next one coming up is, here is what we heard. This is where we're at, and this is where we think we're going, and we want to give them the opportunity to chime in on that. So then as we move on, we'll refine it a little bit more, because as time goes on, your decisions, the TPAC's recommendations, and those things get incorporated. In the end, and it's not really the end, but at the point before we bring it back to the policy board for approval in April, that will be, there will be public involvement for 30 days before that, where we go out and we show them, here's the preferred alternative. These are the projects. This is how those projects perform, if you will. So it's in sort of a steps of development as to what the public sees.
Is there any additional added capacity projects in the new MTP that we're working on versus the current one? Or is it all the same new capacity? The widening I-10 to New Mexico, again, I think we're looking at expanding Purple Heart from 2 lanes each direction to 3 lanes. Are all those added capacity? Are there any additional ones?
There are. One thing that we, I guess here's a good place to mention it. We're developing an amendment to our current plan as well. And that has projects that were brought in to the region for analyses for conformity purposes, and we've already submitted that out to our consultation partners for their review. And it brings in some projects that weren't in the original plan, and it was based on and to some degree they were there, they just weren't in the right place in the plan, so they had to be moved into the right network years. So we're taking those projects as well into consideration when we look at this new plan. So in parallel with developing this new plan, we're doing an amendment to our current plan, okay? In a non-attainment area as we are, it's not just a quick down and dirty, approve it and it's done. It takes a lot of work with our consultation partners and the federal review to find that we got two things covered. One is the fiscal constraint, but the air quality issue, and we have to pass conformity. So those projects that are being considered right now, we're going through this process and developing an amendment to our current plan for conformity is happening daily at the same time we're developing this new plan. Now, back to your question, we haven't finalized the list yet, but the alternative that the MPO is working on has brought in, for example, some projects that came out of a Pell study from for the Border Highway East. So you'll see some alternatives in there that will connect the future proposed Border Highway East north-south connections from the Border Highway East up to I-10. So yes, there are some additional projects. The MPO has gone back and made some recommendations too on projects. So there will be some things that we haven't seen before, and a lot of things that we're aware of that's going on out there. It's important that we take into consideration what the state's doing, and another thing that we were tasked by, as you very well know, that in House Bill 20, we have to develop a 10-year plan. TxDOT has a 10-year plan as well, and the MPO is developing a 10-year plan. We're taking into consideration what those things are in their plan too. So some of those things that we see there have developed into projects that are a little bit different and accelerating projects and whatnot.
Specific one on Border Highway West, we've got 2 lanes each direction, and I know the challenge being, you know, the river and I-10, it's real cramped. Does that have the capacity to go to 3 lane in each direction, or we're at 2 lanes?
I believe we have enough room if we get rid of shoulders to go to 3 lanes, if we absolutely have to. It would be uncomfortable.
Are we planning on at least putting that in the MTP, that added capacity?
Not until we get through this next plan approval.
Okay.
And that's an important point too, is that things change, and we can go back and we can make changes to the plan, understanding though that it's, like I said, it's a much more complicated process if you're in a non-attainment area. But when things like that come up and we don't have it in the plan at this point, if we're not putting it there, and that would boil down to, well, a lot of things, but for a big one, money.
Well, the only reason I'm asking is we had a project on the east side that was in our plan as one certain capacity, then it was let at a different capacity, and it slowed us down quite a bit. I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, because adding capacity in our area is very difficult to do.
Exactly.
So it's better to have more than to have less, is why I asked the question about whether we can go to 3 lanes if needed.
Yeah.
And if everything else that has added capacity or road, and that's any roadway that doesn't exist, if you have a project in your area that doesn't exist today, that's added capacity. So we've got all those identified.
Well, I guess let me just explain a little bit more in its relationship to what we have to do. Is that we, for example, if we take this example that you've asked the district engineer, we can have it in the plan, whether it's a restripe or reconstruction, whatever it is. The issue, as Roger is talking about, although it's captured in the plan holistically, it has to let within the first 4 years, which is the TIP. So aside from the financial element, is that if it's outside the TIP, it triggers a new conformity determination. And so we have to redo the plan, including the conformity report, to demonstrate that we're meeting the federal requirement. So that's where I guess our biggest challenge is that, you know, we need to have a full understanding from the policy board as we develop these projects. So although we could easily finish a plan, if money rains from the sky, it'll trigger a new conformity report. And let me also say this, is that although we're amending existing MTPs, the federal reviewers, or the consultative partners as we call them, they look at the project from ground zero. They just don't go in there and look at the amended stuff. They drill down into the trial demand model, they drill down into the financials, as well as the conformity report. And so we need to make sure that all of us understand what the need is for the region so that we can anticipate those changes. So I can certainly tell you is that if, until we meet with the federal partners to make the determination where the 2020 network is going to be, if it's going to disappear, or if we're going to have a new demonstration year, which would be potentially 21, 22, anything outside that will trigger a new conformity determination if we're changing the capacity of a roadway.
So even though some projects that we're talking about are in the plan, they're not in the network where it would be easy to just, we got money, move forward with them. That's part of the complexity. Also, let's look at the schedule now. I think we can pretty much, as far as task 1 goes, that's administrative and that's ongoing. Task 2 also, we talked about the public involvement element.
I'm sorry,
Yes, sir.
Before we move on to the schedule, did you mention that the update here was going to the EC, the every other week?
Yes, we're bringing an update to this, the progress of the 2045 Destino to the EC every 2 weeks.
Okay,
We're sending a report to them.
Sure. I'd also like it. I think it'd just be best to send it to the entire
Yes, sir.
TPB. Can we do
Yes,
that
sir.
from now?
We can. The report that we sent to the EC was actually outdated, so we updated it for the purpose of the TPB when we provided the packet, and then by the time we actually get to the meeting, it's still changed. So it's dynamic. It certainly keeps on moving. Even though every 2 weeks you might not see, sometimes it looks like a lot's going on, but we'll do our best to always keep you up to date
No, I
with
certainly
the most
appreciate it.
recent.
I know that we're going to walk through the schedule here, but and I think the one thing that overarches all this is it's a fluid process, but it's one that has some very hard deadlines and triggers as well. So
Yes, sir.
for all of the folks that are at the table, all their entities that are trying to meet the demands, to try and get the information to the MPO, to try and make sure that they're doing what they need to do for their communities,
Yes,
it's
sir.
better to have more information than less.
We'll
And so
we'll
I'd
do that.
appreciate
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So on the schedule, public involvement, we've gone through that already. On tasks 3 and 4, the guiding principles, goals, and objectives, we've already, you can see the dates have passed. We've provided out the documentation for that. We've also gone through the performance measures. As you know, a couple of months ago, we were back here at the TPB talking about performance measures. So that brings us down to task 5. And this is the 2045 system needs and the assessment for the needs. As I was talking about back in the report there, what the elements are on that. You can see that it takes quite a bit of time. We've been working on this since the beginning of May, and it won't be completely finalized until about the middle of November. Although we have received a lot of that information. It's still, a work in progress, but we do have a lot of that, and it allows us to move forward with the development of our alternatives. So you will be getting a final needs report in the middle of November. You can see the project call has already happened, and we're looking at those projects, and we'll go into that here in a moment too. And then where we're at right here, under the needs, task 5 is the TPAC alternative review. So we have next week on the 25th and the 26th scheduled TPAC meetings, full quorum. We need to have TPAC available to make recommendations to the TPB. The work there is to take the alternative the MPO is coming back and presenting, to then look at that alternative and make recommendations back to the TPB. Another, we need to keep in mind now that this date down here for TPB preferred alternative approval is December the 15th. So there's a real tight time in here where we need to get to you the preferred alternative, okay? So what we've done at the MPO is develop an alternative for the TPAC's review next week. It's really the roadway capacity alternative. It's not all-inclusive of active transportation and transit. It's got other elements that could be there are other elements that could be considered for the plan. What it is, though, what's coming back to the TPAC is what we've taken and can be modeled and can be measured. And we can demonstrate the performance of the alternative. You can see the improvements and you can see how they perform. Now, the TPAC is going to have a lot of hard decisions to make. In the end, we've given an alternative that has got work to be done because it's not fiscally constrained yet, okay? We've put it out to say, now let's see how this performs, because it has the projects that we've looked at for the region that really are going to make a big difference. But we have to figure out how to make that fit within the fiscal constraint. And let me give you the numbers here now. We're going to jump into the financials in a moment, but we received $6.4 billion worth of projects from all of the entities when we had this call for projects. We have $1.4 billion worth of revenue. Okay, so we're a lot more projects than what we've got money for. Okay, so this work going on now at the TPAC in the next couple of days next week, and then we lead into a regular TPAC the week after that. If things slide, we'll have to move TPAC meetings around, bring the TPAC in, have more special meetings, and ultimately, though, we have to bring it back to this body in December with a preferred alternative. Okay, so we'll go into the financial plan here in a moment with more detail. I'll skip ahead and go to the air quality element. There's some challenges as well here in that we're currently non-attainment for PM10, particulate matter, 10 microns, and we're also in limited maintenance, which is a good thing for carbon monoxide. We're just coming out of a maintenance status. Limited maintenance is less restrictive. It allows us to move forward with our conformity documentation with a little bit less analyses. But we're coming up on becoming a non-attainment for ozone. And we're having a consultation call on the 24th where we'll bring our consultative partners together and we'll be talking about these issues. And what we were talking about a moment ago about the 2020 network, we don't know yet that that's going to be the demonstration year for ozone. We hope it is, because that's where we built our forecast in the model. But if it becomes 2022, for example, then that changes what we're able to do in, say, 21 and 22, which are two critical years of the plan because they become the new years of the TIP. Our TIP that corresponds to this plan is the 2019 to 2022. So we're bringing in 2 additional TIP years, and those TIP years, if you've got projects in there that are in, say, it's a 2022 network instead of a 2020 network, you've got to be able to let and construct those projects and have them open to the public by December 31st of 2022, or you run into a problem with your conformity, and that can stop all the federal funds from coming to the area. So we'll be asking these questions to the consultation partners next week, and as well some assumptions that we've made for the financials, and I'll go into that in a moment. The air quality conformity for the development of this will happen once we get that preferred list. We can go ahead then and run the analyses on those projects for air quality purposes. So until then, we can't really do a whole lot on the actual conformity document, but we have provided the what's called the pre-analysis consensus plan, and these put assumptions out to the consultation partners so they can give us feedback to say, now when you get to your conformity, we've already looked at the preliminary what you're trying to do, and it allows us to set the foundation for the conformity document. But we need to find out these critical questions about air quality and some financial assumptions that we've made. So that's a consultation partner call next week. TIP assistance, Alliance will be providing some assistance on the TIP. Just to let you know, we've already started the TIP. We're on schedule with it. We've got 3 documents that have to be produced here, along with all of our modeling stuff. And that's just for this plan, not to talk about the amendment we're doing. But that's your conformity document, your TIP, your short-range program, and your long-range plan, the MTP. Okay, so all 3 of those, when we get the projects approved and we get that into our documents, we take all that out for public review. and the public will see all 3 of those documents. And that is a federal requirement that we hold public comment for 30 days and allow public to, after having already seen all of this really, but to see it for the last time, make some final comments before it comes back for final approval by the TPB. That takes us down to the final MTP that you'll see. And a lot of this work that we're talking about when it comes to conformity, the TIP, and the final MTP are after the first of the year. So if you don't have any more questions on the schedule, I'll move on to the financials. Yes, sir, Jay.
Yeah, the expiration of the current MTP is next year, June, right?
June 2018.
Is that when, so all of this is, all of the preferred alternatives and the new MTP has to be approved before, has to be approved by us before June 5th?
Yes, sir. The TPB's approval is the April TPB meeting. In May, this will have been submitted to our federal partners for the review and to include the conformity. May, June, July, basically I think is what it is, May, June, July, or April, May, June. We've got it set up so that the 90 days is where you'll submit it will be right up for the conformity review by the federal partners. So let's see here. The 90-day conformity actually is, yeah. We'll start that process and work with the consultative partners and trying to get the 90 days to be the period of time that it takes to get this reviewed and approved by June. So June, where we're going with this is, in a non-attainment area, you have to demonstrate a new plan every 4 years. In an attainment area, you get 5 years, but in a non-attainment, it's every 4 years. And what you're talking about is the clock's about to expire. So what we're doing, though, with the Horizon 2040 amendment is bringing in the projects that we know we need to have so that we can start and let projects that need to be let prior to that. And knowing that we're real tight on this schedule, we expect that the Horizon 2040 MTP amendment is going to carry us, and we'll have what we need there, but in still doing our best effort to make sure that we get this plan approved with the new clock that starts. Well, that's already come before the TPB, and it's out right now for the federal process and the review. We've submitted comments. We received comments from Federal Highway and from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We've sent the comments back to Federal Highway, and TCEQ's comments are very minor. What happens is after Federal Highway has provided their comments, we don't want to get double comments from everybody. Once we get Federal Highway's comments, then EPA might come in, TCEQ. We've already dealt with some of their comments with Federal Highway's comments. TxDOT, New Mexico Department of Transportation, New Mexico Environmental Department. Those guys have to also be satisfied. They provide letters. And if they're satisfied that their comments have been answered, Federal Highway's satisfied that their comments have been answered, Federal Highway and the Federal Transit Administration issue a letter of approval. So it's all of those that have the air quality in particular and financial concerns about the plan. But it goes to, like we were talking about a while ago, is once you open it up, they're reviewing our model that is not just for the amendment to the Horizon 2040, but it's going back to the Trans-Border and the Mission MTP. These are plans back, 10 years ago. They open up the model, and because that model that was for that had other plans in it, then they start critiquing all the projects from the past. But to answer your question, you've already seen it. We're already responding to those comments, and we hope to have them soon resolved, which means we'd get approval on that plan. And then it would allow, for example, that Category 4 money for the Montana project and the projects over on Purple Heart and Americas and so on to actually be able to let, and that's critical. We need to get that, And so we're hoping soon we get approval on that.
When did the TPB take action on that amendment?
I think it was April or May, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Roger, just one last question.
Yes, sir.
What is the most critical date that we need to be worried about?
well,
No, I know that, but.
there's no room for, there's not a lot of flexibility in here right now. One thing I will say is that we need to get the TPAC process taken care of as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. Moving forward, that's happening next week. We've come up with an alternative that we think is a good alternative to present. It's a good point to start. If the TPAC were to throw all that out and say we're going to start all over, well, we probably are going to take quite a bit of time to get through that process. Okay, we're going to put up the financials here. And the first thing you see here in your packet is the 12 funding categories. And these are only on the Texas side, and this is coming through TxDOT. And there are FTA funds, and we'll talk a little bit about that too, and there are New Mexico funds. This is the majority of where the funding is coming from for this plan. And it goes back to the Unified Transportation Program, the UTP, and this is the document that TxDOT uses to do their development of projects as they move forward in developing their 10-year plan. Category 1, what I will say here is that in a moment you're going to see a spreadsheet with a lot of numbers in it. But categories 1 for maintenance and operation, category 6, which is structure replacement and rehabilitation, is really bridge money. Category 8, safety, this is at the state level, not to say it's not for all safety projects, or it is for all safety. And category 10, supplemental. What you're going to see in these numbers is those are programs, they're budgets. They don't add money to what we have to work with for the call for projects. They are dollar in, dollar out. We're looking at a budget. We know that for example, TxDOT is letting maintenance and rehabilitation projects that are based on that budget, and they don't always come, every one of them, through the MPO, and they're not always just for El Paso County. They're for the other counties that TxDOT administers as well. So those budgets, though, are there to demonstrate that there's things going on, but the monies that we really have to work with on the Texas side for highway is category 2. The metropolitan and urban area corridor projects. Category 3 is a big category that can have a lot of things in it, but it's non-traditional funding categories. You may have like if the local entities come up and say we're going to provide local funds, well, that gets captured under there, for example. And there's a lot of other things that can show up in there. Category 4 is the statewide connectivity corridor projects. This is where Prop 1, Prop 7, TMF, Texas Mobility Funds, those kind of things, in some cases, it could show up in other places, but show up there. We don't have that in the outside years of the plan. We only have it up in what we know right now in 2019, and that's not covering projects that we had a call for projects for. Categories 5 and 7 are the two that are administered by the MPO, and that's the CMAQ program, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, and the Surface Transportation program, Category 7 for Metropolitan Mobility. The MPO receives directly the Category 7. The Category 5 comes down through TxDOT. It's for air quality purposes based on formula at the state level. Only those in non-attainment area get it. We, the MPO, administer those two funding categories. And then Category 11 is at the discretion of the district. We've actually put those into the mix, but I will caution that not all of that money is going to come to El Paso, but we do see some projects that we're tasked with, and we had a call for projects for that are putting Category 11 on. In other words, they're bringing them into El Paso County. And yes, sir.
Can you give us examples of some of those projects?
Category 11?
Yes. Discretionary.
Yeah. There's projects out there right now that and
Well,
No, that's a different, it's not the true category, it's 11B or something, I forget what it is.
11B.
Yeah. And what that is really, and I think this is where the senator is going, is the Coordinated Border Infrastructure Program, CBI program. CBI money goes back a long ways. We've received CBI money here at the MPO. The difference between that CBI and the 11B was the way it was written, and that it didn't come to the MPO, but it went to the state. And the state then, TxDOT, can take that 11B money and say, we're going to determine where that's going to go. The CBI money that came, and we still have a little bit in our balance, is determined by this body here.
Where does the new Transportation Intelligence System funding fit in here? Or does it? The 32 million that we got this last session does not fit in here.
Yeah, any of that money,
I think ultimately, as it relates to the policy board, there'll be no nexus to that, because that money, from what I understand, went through the legislators and prescribed that money for that project. And so, because it's not part of the traditional funding that the MPO receives, this body would never have, you know, if you will, an opinion about programming down those dollars.
okay. And then Category 12, strategic priority, is the TTC, the Texas Transportation Commission, will work with the districts and determine where the Category 12 money is going to go. You sometimes see some of the Prop 1, Prop 7 type things pop up here in this area as well. We don't have Category 12 projected out here. We don't. I mean, we don't have any idea what the TTC might say in the future. Now, if we can look at the actual tables, there's 3 tables on this spreadsheet. The top one is those 12 funding categories that we just went over. And this is the revenue only, except for 2019 and 2020. Because we have a tip right now, the 17 through 20, and the new tip will be the 19 through 22, they overlap. So we already know what's happening in 19 and 20. So there are actual projects programmed against these revenue. Outside that, where we had a call for projects from 21 to 45, you're just seeing revenue. Again, I pointed out categories 1, 6, 8, and 10, their budgets. They don't provide actual money back to cover projects, not the ones that we had a call for. And then the middle table is the transit funding, and there's still coordination that needs to happen for the FTA funds. What you see in here right now are your formula fundings for the 5307 program. It covers planning, and it covers things like capital maintenance, curb cuts, and security equipment, these kind of things that the Sun Metro does, and they just keep reoccurring and they keep on moving. We can forecast that out through the plan, make some assumptions on how much they're going to grow, but it's dollar in, dollar out. It's not covering the projects that were submitted by Sun Metro or anybody else for this plan. There's some 5339 bus and bus facility monies here that actually do drop money in, about $50 million worth of it, that can go towards bus and bus facilities. There's other grants that need to be captured here that would pay for projects that we're coordinating with Sun Metro, so that once we get to that point that we bring back the final alternative to the TPB, they will be included in this list. They're not competing against the projects that we had a call for projects for. The table on the bottom is the New Mexico funding. And right now, we've got the same that you saw, 2 funding categories, the CMAQ and the STP. That's what we were seeing from New Mexico. We've projected it out, actually flatlined it out in the duration of the plan, and it's money that's available to any of the entities out there in our New Mexico portion of our planning area. We didn't get projects submitted against that per se from some of the entities, the small entities, and the ones we did get from New Mexico probably are not going to be covered by this. So there's still work that needs to happen with New Mexico if we bring in some of those projects that we're talking about that were submitted by New Mexico, Northeast Parkway elements, for example. Those need to be coordinated with New Mexico. We don't know what the final funding mechanism is going to be on that. What I'd like to bring your attention to now is that $1.4 billion there. That's the total MTP balance that we have to work with on constraining $6.4 billion worth of projects that were submitted to us in the call for projects. Yes, sir.
Back to the Texas Highway funding category, the top box. For the county vehicle registration fee, you've got some money there, $7 million for 2019, but nothing for the rest of the
That's correct.
calendar.
That's a good point.
Why is that?
The 19 and 20 are actually fiscally constrained right now. And this is part of what you're seeing here, and that money is part of the update that we're doing. So it overlaps, and we can show you in 19 and 20 monies that are there to cover projects that were submitted back when, for example, we did the 2013 County Comprehensive Mobility Plan, and vehicle registration fees were put into that tool, if you will, and we've programmed against them. We're coordinating with the county, but at this point, there's no additional vehicle registration fees have been projected out. And I'd point out also, there's no transportation reinvestment zone monies that we used in the past that have been projected out. Okay? So what you see in this plan as opposed to past plans is a lot of revenues that we don't have, that we did have. For example, in toll revenue, we're not looking, with the exception of Border Highway West, we don't have any toll revenue in here. We had $160 million of toll revenue in the past plan. VRF money, we had $75 million, which was matched by TxDOT at $11 million. TRZ, let's see, is in here somewhere. We don't have any TRZ money in the mix here as well either. So there's a lot of revenue, which I've totaled up to about $3.5 billion worth, that we don't have in this plan that we had in the last plan. Okay? We're down to just mainly what we're showing you here. The traditional funding categories that happen in the UTP, the traditional funding that comes from New Mexico, and then the FTA money, which FTA money is going to pay for different things than what we had a call for. Well, some of it will overlap.
Roger, is that because Senator's question about the additional $10 road and bridge fee that the county's collecting, is that because it's been committed? Because that revenue is existing in the future.
Yeah, and that's what we're coordinating with the county to make sure. And if there is
So
any...
there'll be an increase unless, because I don't think there's been a commitment going past a certain date on those revenues. I know it was front-loaded, but...
Mm-hmm. We're trying to get the answers to those questions too, so that we can, when we come back to the TPAC, it's going to be very helpful if we know we have from anybody that has a local funding mechanism, such as VRF, TRZ, which includes the city of El Paso, the Horizon City, Socorro, the county. There's no indication at this time that those funds are available moving forward. We need to find out if there are, and that will help us constrain projects moving into this alternative that we're developing.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
The other thing to recognize is that $6.4 billion worth of needs does not include anything from the Donovan Corridor Study, the Mesa Corridor Study, or the I-10 Corridor Study that are ongoing today. So just a very rough guess, you can add $3 to $4 billion to that 6.4. Yeah. No, just like at breakfast, I want cash.
Okay, I'll just hit on a couple of highlights here. We're assuming a 4% compounded inflation on projects. That we're talking to the consultative partners about. That's pretty standard. That's in Texas. New Mexico, across the state, is doing a 1.5%. The only funds that we're growing are the ones that are administered by the MPO, and that's the CMAQ and the STP. We're doing a 1% on those, and that's because we can see the trend on how they're growing in the UTP, and outside the UTP, we've assumed the same growth rate. We're developing, inside this plan is the TIP, 19 to 22, and outside there for the additional 6 years will be the House Bill 20, if you will, the 10-year plan. It will be what comes out of the MTP, and it will be a reflection of the first 10 years. That changes over time. What's important about that, I guess, that conversation is that House Bill 20 is not necessarily, we're still trying to get to the end, find out the answers to some of those questions, but conformity. Conformity, does it have to follow the federal process? Because if it does, you can't just amend the first 10 years in your plan if it affects conformity for the purpose of House Bill 20. So that puts us in a predicament where, well, we have a federal process, and if we want to make amendments, it takes time.
The answer will lie with the TTC, the Texas Transportation Commission, because the 10-year plan that we put in HB 20 was meant to be dictated by TxDOT with a relationship with the MPO. So take it up the chain.
Yeah, and that's
I think that's what we're doing, is that there's meetings that are going to occur within a committee that's made up of MPOs, district engineers, and of course TxDOT administration. But let me just go back to the 10-year plan. Is that, as mentioned before, the district has developed a 10-year plan along with other districts, and so that's before the TTC. The TIP is also tied to the 10-year plan, and it is in the TIP that it's tied to the Clean Air Act. So ultimately, the question that we have is that regardless of what the TTT says, that ultimately, is there any changes done, is that it will trigger conformity determinations. And that's because it's a relationship back to the MPO. Now, in a relationship to TxDOT, I think that the districts can develop continuous 10-year plans every year if that's what's needed as a function of the UTP. But from our perspective, the scenario that I'm going to present is that although the district may submit a 10-year plan every year, we can't do one like that because it's going to trigger conformity. And so the scenario may be where the district is 3 years ahead of us in development of a 10-year plan. We have to catch up whenever we do a new MTP. So that's one of the questions that I have asked the executive director of TEMPO to ask on behalf of the El Paso MPO, because it becomes critical. Because the last thing that we want is disruption between the 10-year plan that the district has and the MPO has.
Well, I would say the district plan would be the one you want to look at, because as we know, the short-term TIP is federally required, the long-term MTP is federally required, and the state of Texas does the Unified Transportation Plan, which is not a federally required document, but it's 10 years. And so that was the reason why we put that in HB 20, was to try to get on a better idea what our own state is planning in the UTP. So I would say that it's going to be based on the district 10-year plan.
And that's a reflection of the alternative too that we're presenting.
Right, so I think just to elaborate, since we're talking about the 10-year plan, at the EC meeting, there was a discussion about the 10-year plan. And I also brought up my concern with particulate matter, which is dust. So we have, in the past, run scenarios where we do tier planning in terms of capacity projects. So my concern with this plan is that because the amount of revenue that is available, federal revenue that's available, and unless the local partners develop the tools for the MPO, we will not be able to afford everything. So my concern is that if we present a scenario that complements the House Bill 20 response from the district to the TTC, it may address PM10. Now, any alternative that the TPAC develops may not. And so there's going to be this cycle that's going to eat up time. So in the end, the MPO is going to have to come back to this policy board and say there's an alternative that meets PM10 and we can constrain. Now, at the same time, is that we want to make sure that you all understand that this MTP development is not absolute. We can always make changes. We have to develop a plan every 4 years. So that means in the next 2 coming years, we have to develop a new plan.
Well, and again, this is in TxDOT's hand, but the intent, here's what the intent was behind. To get a project in the short-term plan, it helped if it was in the long-term MTP then was brought forward. Projects were being brought forward around the state in that outlying plan, in some cases too quickly. And so the ideal was that the 10-year plan should reflect what the Unified Transportation 10-year plan of TxDOT. So it should almost be the TIP, the short-term plan, plus those next 6 years of the Unified Transportation Plan. So that anything that was outside the TIP, but within 6 years, we were trying to keep it restrained to that so that you didn't pull something that was from 20 years forward. So I think we're getting more complicated than it needs to be, but TxDOT does need to weigh in. We gave them the authority, and they're also supposed to be giving you support in developing the 10-year plan.
I will say that we have a list of projects from the 10-year plan, but we also have projects that we've seen within that 10-year that are not in the 10-year plan, which makes it impossible with the revenue we've got to fiscally constrain. That's a problem.
Right. So I think that ultimately is that, you know, their critical point is really TPAC. And so although the MPO can go back and make further refinements to recommendations, at the end of the day is that we need to ensure that we address PM10. Because whatever scenario that comes out of TPAC for recommendation could be the best. But if it fails from an air quality perspective, we don't have a plan. And so I need to make sure that everybody understands that, because the areas that have a lot of impact to us is far east, the county of El Paso. So not to get too technical, it's just that nobody lives out there and there's not sufficient roadways to carry that travel. And so because of how the model works is that it kind of penalizes us because we have dirt roads out there. So the bottom line is that we need to make sure that everybody understands that although we can come with the best alternative from a financial perspective or even a political perspective, if we don't make that PM10, if we don't demonstrate to it and pass it, we have no plan.
Okay. Quickly, we have to do total project costs, which includes construction, preliminary engineering, and right-of-way at the MTP level. So those elements have to be constrained in our plan. We're also looking like, and I'd mentioned it earlier, what the alternative coming back to the TPAC at this next two meetings is the roadway capacity alternative. It doesn't include where CMAQ, all the CMAQ money could be spent, or the TAP monies, for example, to do those type of projects. That would take more work to get there, which would happen after the roadway element for capacity, because that's where we measure what we're doing for our for the needs to satisfy the air quality, for one thing. But there's post modeling and things that we can do, especially when we look at CMAQ. But there's other work that'll have to happen. The TPAC's going to have to be pretty busy coming up here in the next few weeks or a couple of months. And lastly, in the back of all of this is a list of all of the projects that were submitted. So for your convenience, you can see by entity, and you can see the amounts. And if you look at the next to the last page, you can see the total on all of those projects. So I think that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, there it is. Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Question regarding this table here. I just want to understand the methodology in terms of why, and it goes a little bit to what Senator Rodriguez says. Am I understanding that if you have funding in one fiscal year or two fiscal years and not up until 2045, that you are just taking all the funding and putting it to the current years? Or is it because we don't have a clear understanding if there's going to be available funding up until
The way
2045?
the funding works in the first 10 years is it's fiscally constrained by funding category, and it cannot move. You'll notice on the bottom of that top table there's a funding or a line there. It says non-carryover. The reason that is, and you can't move it forward or backwards to meet your needs, is because it takes action by the Texas Transportation Commission to move those funds around.
Okay.
So if they come back and say, yeah, we're going to take all that money you've got in CMAQ and we're going to flex it over to STP and we're going to put it on a project over here because you have a need, well, they can do that, but we, the MPO, can't. Now, after that first 10 years, the way we constrain, and this has been approved all the way back to the safety lube, which is the transportation bill 3 bills back, is that you can take your outer years of your MTP and assume those monies out there can cover projects without being as specific about what year they go in. So we band those. We take 10 years and we go, here's all the money we got and here's all the projects, and we constrain them like that. Very different than the first 10 years, which is a reflection of the UTP, and that, again, takes decisions by the TTC.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have other questions? Okay, thank you, Roger.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you make the print smaller next time? It'd be helpful. Thank you. No, I mean, I think the overarching point for everybody here and for your entities that you represent is you're looking at an amendment that's ongoing, 4 years, 10 years, and the new MTP. So there are a lot of things going on here at once. So stay involved with the staff. If you're not reaching out to the staff or you're not reaching out to TxDOT and you don't have your answers, then that communication breakdown can cause problems down the road. So don't wait till next week when you look at the tightness of this calendar. Don't wait till next week to ask the question you think is very important to a project in your that's significant to your area. So can't reiterate that any more than I think we have today. And Roger, thank you for the presentation. I hope we're looking for opportunities to speed up the timeline as well, and not just looking for ways to make sure we get to the April timeline. All right, thank you. Public comment?
We do have public comment from Mr. Mike Rooney.
Mr. Rooney? Did you approve all the projects on the list, Mr. Rooney? Yeah, please. If you can carve this down to 1.4 billion, we'd appreciate it.
This is the more detail on that follows there. It's item number 3, bicycle infrastructure citywide. It's the third one down on the detailed list. It says, Lee Trevino from Edgemere, how are you gonna put a bike lane on Lee Trevino without taking out one of the driving lanes? And then on the next, I guess it's from to, and then there's one George Dieter to Edgemere. You might, Lee Trevino has 3 driving lanes in each direction. George Dieter has 2, but we're so tied up out there that the traffic always flows heavily. And so you really need to I take it since this is on the list, these things are gonna go. Could the MPO and the city please send some staff members out? The city repaved an atrocious piece of road called Lee. It's the next road north-south. It's to the east of George Dieter. They repaved Lee between Pebble Hills and Montwood. It used to be 2 lanes in each direction. What they did, it's a beautiful paved road, but what they did is they reduced it to 2 lanes. They added a bike lane, and I guess they call it the buffer between that, and then they made an extra wide turn lane. It sure looks like you could have repaved it, left 2 lanes in each direction, and put in the bike lane. I mean, why go out and reduce the traffic flow in a restricted area of town? Basically, did you crap on the drivers that use those roads unintentionally? I know that as decision makers, you probably wouldn't have done it, but did the staff put this thing together? So I'm not against bike lanes. I know I drive Scott White crazy and Senator Rodriguez. But I mean, do we do things that aren't very smart and then put people in conflict? So before you do Lee Trevino and George Dieter, please send somebody out. can look at that and say, is this really the smartest thing to do? And Mr. Chairman, don't call me for number 4, just call me from number 5, because you had a detailed discussion here.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. And to clarify, I think the projects that have been submitted are, these are the ones that are being considered, so the input you're giving is, I mean, the city of El Paso submitted this project, and so I guess they'll take your commentary into consideration. Do we have any other public comment?
No other public comment.
Okay. So we move to item 4, please.
Item number 4 is the El Paso County Transit Study Report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Policy Board. Jose Landeros, Vice Chairman of the TPAC and with the county. Wanted to just briefly introduce the staff from TTI who'll be presenting the update to the board this morning. Just to give you some context about this project, this is an MPO-funded project. For those of you who attended the training, you can see that there is a CSJ number attached to it, and it is active, which means we are charging the state back for our money. But this was approved back in July of 2015, and it has been quite some time for us to arrive where we are today. You recall that back in June of 2017, some of your technical staff from all your agencies were invited to stakeholder meetings to discuss the launch of the study. We wrapped up our second round of stakeholder meetings just yesterday afternoon here in this room. The plan is to have this finalized after a series of open house meetings in December of this year. The goal of the study was to really do 2 things, was to identify existing service gaps in the county service area, as well as between the county service area and the city of El Paso service area, and how we can better merge and have complementary service, and also to begin to identify the steps that would be necessary for a truly regional transit system. When we think about large metropolitan urban areas throughout the state of Texas and actually across the nation, they often are served by regional transit agencies that serve various municipalities, sometimes multiple counties. And here in Texas, we can look to Dallas with DART or Houston with Metro for examples of how successful and critical regional transit service can be. It's a step towards regional transit not only benefits the users, but it furthers our community's longstanding vision of being one region when it comes to economics, when it comes to social issues, and now more importantly, as it relates to this, mobility. So with that, I'd like to thank the TTI staff who's been working tirelessly over the past few months on this. Ms. Linda Charrington out of the Houston office for TTI, Michael Walk out of Austin, Tina Geiselbrecht also out of Austin, and then locally, Mr. David Galacia. Those 4 individuals, along with all the support staff for TTI, has really done a phenomenal job, and we are very excited for them to share some preliminary findings and update the board on the progress for the study. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Jose. Linda Charrington with TTI in Houston office. I wanted to go over with you a little bit of our overall project scope and then ask my colleague Michael Walk to speak to specifics. As Jose mentioned, this is a project funded from El Paso County and with TxDOT planning funds, and we're appreciative of this support for our research and technical assistance. The scope of the project included an overall review of current services provided by El Paso County. We also assessed characteristics of the current riders through an onboard passenger survey, and we reviewed the transit need based on demographic characteristics of the residents of the county, and we also reviewed the transit supply, that is the amount of transit service available to meet those needs through the routes, hours, and miles of service provided by both Sun Metro and El Paso County. The preliminary information was important to assess the potential to improve transit services to provide more trip purposes for the residents, particularly outside of the city of El Paso in El Paso County. We wanted to serve access to jobs, education, shopping, medical services, etc. We examined the feasibility of looking at a seamless, wide, county-wide transit system by complementing the Sun Metro infrastructure, and we identified alternatives. You'll see those referred to as scenarios today for different service design for El Paso County, and we'll also talk a little bit today about the organizational structure options and funding requirements for these different scenarios. I might mention that you have, in addition to the presentation we're going to be making, you have a handout in your packet information which provides illustrative maps of the different scenarios, and you might want to have those handy for reference. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Michael now.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we got into the different transit service scenarios, we wanted to start by discussing and refreshing the inventory of transit that's already in place right now. So first, looking at El Paso County and the transit services that El Paso County provides, there's really three main types of service. Those include county bus routes. There's 6 of them that operate throughout El Paso County and connect riders from the county to Sun Metro transfer centers. Those fixed routes, serve a critical need in the region. We surveyed the riders of those routes, in fact, and asked them how important transit was to them. And there's some key factors that came out of that survey research of those county bus riders. For instance, we found that 75% of the county bus riders transfer to or from Sun Metro in order to complete their trip. We found that 63% of the current county bus riders do not have a driver's license. In fact, 59% do not have an independent means of travel. That means if the county bus system was not there, they would either not travel or they would have to ask somebody else to take them on their trip. And so these all demonstrate the criticality and the need that's out there in the county in order to transport people to and from their destinations. What are those destinations? We also asked riders about why they were taking their trip on that day when we surveyed them. And over 1/4 of them, and the most common reason to take the bus, was to go to or from work. And we think these are important characteristics to understand when we're talking about the types of services that will work well for this countywide transit system. So you do have the 6 county bus routes. We learned a little bit about their riders. The county also does provide an intercity bus in cooperation with New Mexico DOT from Las Cruces to El Paso, and also has a comprehensive and rather extensive van pool program. When you hear us talk today about the different scenarios, we aren't changing or proposing any changes to the gold route, the intercity bus, and we're not proposing any changes to the van pool program. We're assuming those will continue into the future as they currently exist, or they will grow on their own. This next slide shows you a little bit about the current services in the region. The left-hand side of the slide is a map of the service areas of Sun Metro, which is shown in blue, and all the blue lines in the blue area are the Sun Metro bus routes. And the service area that is green, that is the El Paso County transit service area. You'll see there is one blue bus route that squiggles down into the southeast. That bus route is operated by Sun Metro, but under agreement with El Paso County, just for reference. On the right-hand side is a map of what we call a transit gap. And so Linda talked about how we assess the transit need throughout the county and the transit supply throughout the county. And when you compare supply to need and see whether need exceeds supply, that creates a transit gap. And areas in red on the map are areas with the highest transit gap in the county. And so you can see where those areas of red are, to the southeast, also in the northwest, and also to the east side of the city. So we think this is important information to remember as we talk about a countywide transit system and how to meet the need of people in the region. So as we began thinking about the different types of scenarios or transit scenarios that might work for the county, we wanted to set out and start with some goals. So this slide lists 5 goals that we started with, including rural coverage, urban coverage, utility, effectiveness, and also complementarity to Sun Metro. We describe them on the slide and also have developed a measure for each one of these goals. We will apply these goals to every single scenario and then quantify how well we did on each of these goals using the measure in the right-hand column. I think it's important to touch on, again, how important it is that any type of transit service scenario will complement Sun Metro's existing assets and leverage the transfer centers, the current and planned BRIO lines that are both here and coming in the future. That's such an important part of making this system work well, and we took that into account in all of our service scenarios. So I'm going to walk you through, in a very quick upper level, each of the service scenarios. We developed 5 of them, and as Linda mentioned, you do have a handout with illustrative maps and key facts about each scenario, but I'll just quickly describe each one and what's different as we go from scenario 1 through scenario 5. First, of course, at the top of the list is the current service. El Paso County's current county bus routes that feed residents from the county into Sun Metro transfer centers. Now, one option, and we put it up as scenario number 1, is to focus on serving the rural area of the county. So scenario number 1 reflects a type of service where the rural area of the county has access to general public demand response transit. That is, they can call ahead and ask for a ride, and the vehicle will come and pick them up and take them to their destination. So in that scenario, what that accomplishes is that 100% of the rural area of the county has access to transit. There's also scenario number 2, where we propose a set of flexible routes. So just talking very quickly, what that accomplishes is different than the current system. The current system are fixed routes. They don't deviate off of the route. They operate throughout the county. A flexible route allows somebody to request, if needed, that the bus deviate from the route and come and pick them up, as long as they are within 3/4 of a mile of the actual route. So we call that flexible service because it's able to flex off of the standard route and pick up a person within 3/4 of a mile. This helps to expand transit access, right? Because if you cannot get to the bus stop currently, but you're within 3/4 of a mile, now the bus can come to you. And so we're proposing that as scenario number 2, as a way to meet that need for increased access. Another component of scenario 2 that's important to understand is we are now introducing actual bus stops, fixed bus stops, into the county's bus system. So currently, most of the routes that the county operates operate under a flag stop type system where you have to flag the bus driver down alongside the road. Under every scenario, 2 through 5, we are proposing and including fixed bus stops along every route. And moving to scenario 3, basically is the sum of scenarios 1 and 2. So now we are providing rural access to the county through general public demand response and continuing to provide our flexible bus routes throughout the remainder of the county, particularly in the urban areas. This accomplishes both goals, right? Access in the urban area as well as access in the rural areas of the county. Moving on to scenario number 4, we also wanted to look at what it would look like to provide standard fixed route service. Standard fixed route service, the bus routes would not deviate if somebody called. And they would just operate on their standard routes serving their stops. Now, if you have standard fixed route service, you also need to provide complimentary ADA paratransit for the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that is also built into the cost for scenario number 4. The one benefit of scenario 4 is that the bus service itself would be a little bit faster in operation, a little bit more direct for a person who's riding the bus because the bus wouldn't deviate off. But there are trade-offs with all these scenarios. And so you're not able to provide county-wide general public demand response in scenario 4 in order to keep the costs within what we set it out to be. Scenario number 5 is the last one we'll present to you, and it's what we call the enhanced flexible service. So we're going back again to talking about flexible bus routes that'll deviate off if needed to pick up somebody who needs it. and still providing general public demand response in the rural parts of the county. The difference with Scenario 5 is that we did enhance the coverage and service levels of the county bus routes. So in Scenario 5, we do add 2 bus routes to the county bus network and also work to improve the frequency of service where we could. And so these kind of incrementally go up in terms of the goals that they accomplish and also in the relative cost of each. One thing that I failed to mention, I think it's important to understand also, in Scenarios 3 through 5, we built in costs to help coordinate transfers between bus routes. I talked about how important it is that the county riders transfer between services, and we took that into consideration in order to help time those transfers in Scenarios 3 through 5, so there's costs built in to accommodate that. The next slide with the graphics, the little full, half, and empty moons, also known as Harvey balls, these help us to look at how well each transit service scenario performs across each of our 5 goals. It's important to remember that the circles and how much they're filled in are all relative, right? So an empty circle doesn't mean that you don't accomplish this goal at all. It means that it's the lowest out of all 5 scenarios, including current, so all 6. So an empty circle means it's on the low end of performing on that goal. A full circle means it's on the high end. And we also show on this chart or the table whether anyone under the scenario would perhaps lose transit access, and also show the relative cost of that service scenario, just speaking strictly in operating costs. And so just to kind of put this in context, the current service is about $4.2 million in operating cost. And these dollar signs are all relative to each other. So twice as many dollar signs equates to twice as much cost. Okay, so that's a summary of the service scenarios. I'm going to turn it back over to Linda to talk about sources of funding.
When you consider the increase in services that we provided with some of the scenarios, it also raises the question of how do you fund those? There are, of course, several different ways to fund transit service. I've identified most of the categories. There are federal funds available, both through the Federal Transit Administration and through the Federal Highway Administration. And there is state funds available from the state of Texas and from the state of New Mexico. Both those states currently fund El Paso County Transit Service. There is also, in addition to transit-generated funds from passenger fares, there's the opportunity to generate funds from contracted services or from advertising. But there is always a requirement for local fund support. And those local funds can come from a number of different local government sources. There is the state sales tax dedicated to transit, which currently supports Sun Metro services. And there's also the ability to use general revenues or other sources of municipal taxes in order to support transit. I've identified several categories. And one of the things that I want to mention to you is that as the additional service costs increase, then it's necessary, and even if you leverage more federal or state dollars, the costs of local share increases as well. And so that's a very important element of the next phase of our work is to take a look at how we could potentially expand sustainable local share funding. One of the things that we were asked to take a look at is whether there are organizational options for a countywide transit authority. And we identified 4 possible categories under state statute now. There is the County Mass Transit Authority under Transportation Code Chapter 457. It is specifically identified for the El Paso County because of the characteristics of that transportation code, and it is possible to call an election of the voters to create a countywide transit authority under 457. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Another option for a countywide transit organization is the Regional Mobility Authority. The scope of an RMA includes transit systems, and of course your RMA includes the capacity for bi-state and international transit services. So that's another option for a countywide transit organization. A local government corporation currently exists under Transportation Code Chapter 431, and this would be the possibility of local governments to voluntarily agree to create a public corporation for the purposes of providing countywide transit. It could include the county, the city of El Paso, and the other cities in El Paso County. The advantage of a local government corporation is it creates an official body, and including a board of directors representing the member governments, and it sets some formality about a voluntary organization of the different local governments. It would set a budget, it would have a service plan, the local governments would be represented on the board, and it would be an implementation ability to create a countywide transit system. But it would still be reliant upon local government revenues to support the other state and federal funds. Interlocal agreements are, of course, common right now. The county and the city currently have an interlocal agreement to provide Route 84 into the county, and that would simply expand that option to include more services. So an interlocal agreements are basically not as formal as a local government corporation, but are very similar in structure. We have assessed each of these, and I want to come back to Chapter 457 because it was created especially for El Paso County. It requires that the county have a city of population more than 500,000, El Paso, and it have an existing transit authority created under Chapter 453, a mass transit department, and that's Sun Metro. And so those are the requirements to apply for 457. If the city of over 500,000, the county, and at least one other city agree that it would be good to have a countywide transit authority, they could call a vote of the population outside the city, in this case of the city of El Paso. And that vote would be to create a countywide transit authority and to fund it with a sales tax that has to be equal to the city. So that's a half a penny, 0.5%. And that's where the challenge becomes in applying the county mass transit authority. The next slide shows you the cities that already meet the maximum capacity for a local sales tax of 2%. Under the state constitution, you cannot have a cumulative state and local government above 8.25% sales tax. And for those cities that have already met the 2% local tax, they would not have the capacity to call an election to vote an additional tax to support a countywide mass transit authority. And the red rows indicate those cities that are currently at capacity. So in order to call an election for a county mass transit authority, it would be necessary for these cities either to agree to roll back the sales tax to make room for a transit tax, or for a constitutional amendment come into effect to raise the requirement, the ability to raise the local sales tax total. And that is why we come back to looking at other options for countywide transit authority or government options. Our next step has been to discuss with stakeholders. Jose mentioned that we met with stakeholders yesterday. We hope to engage stakeholders, and many of you were a party to briefings yesterday, that we will engage the local stakeholders into more conversation about the governance and the local funding options. We hope to hold open houses for feedback from the public. They are currently scheduled for December 5th through the 9th, the first week of December. The locations will be announced, but they will be in accessible public facilities where there's current transit service. And so that we might have some pop-up public meetings as well, going to where individuals who use transit or may need transit would be available to talk with us and individually. And we will be preparing a report for review the county and the other stakeholders by the end of December, and we will ask for feedback on that final report. Michael or I would be happy to answer any questions for you now. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Just for clarification, I believe you said that an election would be held outside of the city of El Paso?
Yeah, the 457 does not call for the voters in the city of El Paso, which currently has a transit authority.
Okay.
It would be for the voters outside the city of El Paso to create a countywide and provide the equivalent sales tax.
Okay,
And because the city of El Paso currently has a sales tax and a transit authority, they wouldn't be called to vote.
right, but the taxing authority then would only have jurisdiction outside the city?
No, then it would create a countywide transit authority.
Okay,
So it would transition from a city authority to a countywide authority.
Okay, but the city, and that's what I'm trying to get my head around, the city would have no say in whether or not
the city would have a say in order to call the election. So the city would have to agree that it was in the best interest of the city and the county to call for an election to create a countywide transit authority. And so the city would have an option to not agree to that, but the city would have the say,
So it's
in
not a
in
city
other
has a
words,
vote
to
in it,
call
the
the
city has
election.
to
Yes,
agree.
yes.
Thank you.
And that's the way the legislation is structured, yeah.
I have a question. I know that you provided projected cost in terms of that, and then I know it's difficult to determine in terms of, any projected revenues. But have you done that in terms of providing different scenarios of the expected revenues for each scenario that you've had?
Yes, we have developed preliminary cost estimates. We both estimated the cost for the operations of each of the scenarios and the capital cost, and that's an important point to make. The capital costs include vehicles and also amortized annual costs to provide passenger amenities. There are not currently bus stops or bus shelters in the county, and each of the scenarios 2 through 5 include a capital investment to improve passenger amenities. And we've also estimated sources of revenues, largely including the current sources of revenue and extending them through each of the scenarios, and then determining what the local share requirement would then be. And that is part that's reflected in the dollar signs. And those revenues, the local share revenues, could be reduced by more aggressive funding from the federal government or from the state government, but eventually, at some point, the necessity is to local funding. But we do have preliminary estimates for each of the scenarios.
Only because, that would make a difference in terms of what the policymakers decide in which scenario, because it may not even though it may be more expensive in terms of operating costs, you may generate more revenue, and so
Exactly,
looking at the net
exactly.
is what would be.
And we have estimated those. We're vetting those through the stakeholders, and we would absolutely have that information to share with the public in the 1st of December and also in the final report.
Thank you.
Jay?
Linda, on the, going back maybe to add a little bit of what Dr. No said, so that if there was a bigger board made of an entire county authority, then the board makeup would have to be determined. How would that go about, considering the city has put in about $650 million of investment of infrastructure and pay about $70 million of operating costs? How would the board makeup be, let's say if the entire county was part of one authority, how would that makeup be, because we have a bigger investment from the city compared to the services that would be provided outside the city?
457, and I don't recall at this moment, 457 may dictate the composition of the board and the countywide transit authority. In other regions of the state, the dominant city, the largest city, has a larger share of the board members, and then the county and the smaller cities have their representation as well. Your point about the financial plan would be what the city and the county and at least one other city would consider in the call for a vote. We haven't looked at that because based on the assessment of the sales tax, we don't believe that the countywide 457 would be a viable option right now. But we wanted to share that with you because it is obviously an option, but prevented from the local sales tax. So we haven't gone into that type of financial planning. We've assumed that the additional services in the county would be funded under our financial scenarios.
Well, I had a variation of that question, I think, because I was going to ask, you know, when you talk about local share, you're talking about total local share versus the outside funding sources, federal and so forth, state. But within the city and the county, have you all looked, I guess I was going to ask, not with regard to the representation on a countywide board, but rather the respective contributions of the county versus the city? Did you all look at that?
Well, all of our scenarios assume additional services in the county. So it's outside the city of El Paso. We don't make any estimates or comment about the Sun Metro services in the city. These are all the scenarios, and the financial planning that we've done so far is all outside the city of El Paso. And we do have some estimates of the amount of service, the population of the unincorporated county and each of the incorporated cities. We do have information about each of those services and how much of their population is served and what the cost would be. And if you applied all the sources of revenue, what the relative local share would be. But those are estimates right now. Part of it is which of the scenarios is the most favored, and then we would go into more detailed financial planning and meet with. And the funding is right now, under these scenarios, assumed to be from the county and or the cities and or the federal and state funding that comes as
And my
available.
second question then is, I mean, you looked at all 5 scenarios, and you just said a while ago that one of them is maybe not doable. What do you recommend? What is your assessment of which would be the best? I mean, I know that's a decision for the policymakers,
right.
but in terms of you all as professionals looking at our situation here in this region, what do you think is the best?
Well, all 5 scenarios are viable. They are good scenarios to be evaluated and discussed with the public. The option on governance is the one, the countywide mass transit authority under 457 is the one that may not be viable because of the sales tax limitation. So under the service scenarios, we have not made an estimate of what would be recommended. I might go back to.
Well, you have scenario 5,
Yeah,
and that
this
covers 100%, but it costs more.
Yes, exactly. So if you look at this scenario, if you look at the widest column, the second from the right, it speaks to whether or not current transit riders may lose service. And that's a very important comment because we want to be sure that we provide current riders that are using the service the same and better opportunities. And so if you notice that that chart, the scenarios 3 and 5 do not reduce any of the current services. They provide the same service, the same access to service as the current riders and expand that. Scenario 1 is only in the rural areas of the county, and so it does not meet the other 4 goals. And so I would, if I were, it's not my place at this time before we get public feedback and feedback from the stakeholders, but I would think that would be a less than desirable service because you want to provide service to the expanding urban areas outside the city of El Paso and the county. And scenario number 2 is actually a little less service because in order to provide the flexible route option, we had to reduce the length of some of the existing routes. And so in the most the areas that are least dense, there would be a little less service, and so that's how those individuals. Scenario 4 also doesn't provide general public demand response in the rural area, and so that would tend to point you toward options 2, 3, or 5. And 5, as you mentioned, is the best of all the scenarios to meeting the goals, but it's at a higher price.
Well, it reminds me of those dollar signs of the restaurant, whether I'm going to go eat or not. But I, for one, think, that's full coverage, and I think it would be a question of where we get the money.
Exactly, exactly.
That's certainly one I would prefer.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Questions. In terms of Chapter 457, when was this proposed or written, the sort of history of a Chapter 57? 97? Okay. I guess my question is kind of looking at it, and maybe this is cart before the horse, but I guess discussions as it relates towards stakeholders, specifically in terms of workforce development and our educational institutions as well. It seems that, for example, with the Gold Route, it stops in Anthony Westside Transfer Center, downtown El Paso. With an additional stop at the Glory Road Transfer Center, you'd be able to serve the majority of the county and the northwest part of the county to UTEP for continuing education. And I think, too, that UTEP is such an important regional asset as it relates towards education, not just within El Paso County, but also with our brothers and sisters in Ciudad Juarez. So it seems that looking at a county-wide transit authority, how it can integrate realistically with UTEP and probably EPCC as well, I think is important. I think that when we look at these additional routes and we look at connectivity and who is it serving, I think that the need for transportation is probably one of the biggest hindrances for students in continuing and being able to graduate and being able to put themselves up on a higher level and our community up on a higher level as well. So I think that it's really important to sort of see that kind of integration, looking at UTEP and looking at EPCC, so that whatever is proposed isn't just necessarily a route to have a route, but actually is serving to better our community, invest in our best and brightest assets, our people and our kids.
Very good points.
So that was just kind of my observation on it. Do you have an idea in terms of stakeholder lists, who some of these stakeholders that y'all are interfacing with or plan to?
Yes, we have a stakeholder group and that we've met with twice so far, and we've scheduled the next meeting. And it is representatives of TxDOT, Sun Metro, the county, the cities in the county, the city of El Paso, who have I forgotten? Project Amistad, other providers in the service, and it includes the agencies that represent. In fact, UTEP is on the list. The agencies that represent the individual's needs for service.
I think too, in terms of that stakeholder list, it'd be important to really look at EPCC, UTEP, in addition to the Borderplex workforce solutions as well, to really better understand kind of what are the current needs now and anticipated, so that we really have a more holistic approach.
And the workforce is included in our stakeholder notices, but we'll try to make a point to meet with these individuals personally.
And you said they were anticipating public meetings in December?
Yes, December 5th through the 9th.
Is there, so it's going to be over a week, is there a specific set locations for those meetings?
We're settling on the locations. We should know by the November 1st, and in order to have a month to advertise them. But they're in public meetings. Last time they were all in county public facilities. And we're also looking at locations, for example, community centers and schools this time, and they're throughout the county. So there were 5 last time, Tina, 4, and they were throughout the quadrants of the county. And we plan the same. In addition to these pop-up public meetings, which we have been finding is very effective, we might have a pop-up meeting at, for example, a transfer center, so that we can talk to the riders individually, or at a community festival, so that we can talk to members of the community that currently don't use the transit but might in the future. So.
Okay. I also think too, it would probably be advantageous to consider, on UTEP's campus, I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are students that would like to use it or have, are using public transit or carpooling or that.
Good.
I think
Thank you.
that transportation mobility is probably a big issue for a lot of students in the administration.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You took the words right out of my mouth, because I was gonna say that as well. I mean, in our city, most of our residents work in El Paso. I mean, some of them don't have vehicles as well, as you all know. But it's not the only issue. We're a small municipality like Clint, San Elizario. We all need help, The only thing I see that I don't like is that if we do decide to come up with the funding mechanism for this project, is the fact that if we want to go to elections, we're going to be held to El Paso to say yes or no, and then everything goes down the drain. I mean, I think that we need to look at an overall transit countywide, because we're not just talking about El Paso now. People need to understand in this board that San Elizario residents go to El Paso as well. They go to school. That's why it's very important. These are our people who need help. They don't have vehicles. They want a better life. How are you going to get a better life? You need to go get a good education. That's one of the things that that I said that he took the words right out of my mouth, because if you don't get a good and proper education, what kind of a job are you going to have? What kind of a future are you going to have? It's one of those things that this is a good plan. I believe we need to look at, funding sources. I mean, I, for one, will say I'll do anything and try to bring it to my board and try to find a solution for the funding. But one of the things is that that's the only issue that I have, is that we're going to be set back if El Paso doesn't want to, because they're worried about, what the board's going to look like, or they're not going to have a lot of say. I mean, that's not an issue. The issue is we need to help our constituency. That is the bottom line. We need to help the people that are in dire and desperate need. That is the issue, not the issue about what the makeup is. And that's something that we have to really, unite, and say, hey, we're going to help the people, the public, the people in need. We're all, here. Last night I said to the board, hey, I'm not a commissioner. I don't see myself as a commissioner on my city. I see myself as a rep, because I'm a representative of all of you. And that's what I want to tell you guys, is that we have to look at it as a whole, and not just because we don't want to lose, what we have. We're going to help the community itself. And that's one of the things, and that's the only thing that I just don't like about, 457 or 452.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on, I've got an order of things, and some people have spoken once already, so I want to get to folks that haven't yet. Commissioner Bettis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to TTI for the presentation. I just want to remind members of the TPB that this has actually been a 2-year initiative. And again, the findings are very preliminary. I just want to emphasize that. The County of El Paso paid for this initiative, and we received matching funds from the MPO. Sun Metro and UTEP provided letters of support, which helped make this study possible. I don't want to get too hung up on the governance issue. I've already sent a message to Mayor Margot and copied City Manager Gonzalez on this presentation today and some of the preliminary findings. I think in looking at all I think there's been a lot of emphasis on the governance, but not necessarily the service component of it. After I speak with Mayor Margot to see if there is a willingness to partner in some form or fashion with the county and the outlying municipalities, I intend on meeting with each of the mayors of the municipalities or representatives to see what funding structure can be possible. Because as you saw from the list up there, a lot of municipalities or a lot of municipalities are already capped out and aren't able to contribute the 0.5% in sales tax. So we're going to have to figure out some other funding mechanism. I know that's the case in Horizon, but I'm gonna, as I talk with the representatives and I talk with the mayor, Margot. I hope that we can come up with some sort of funding mechanism where each of the municipalities, if they can't contribute a sales tax, well, then perhaps can make a contribution from their general fund. The county right now is currently considering extending the contract with TTI to go into the particulars to the question that you raised, Ms. Lambranga, regarding the amount of funding, but this way it'll be segregated by entity. So like based on ridership, and so Socorro's cost allocation would be this much, San Elisadio's cost allocation this much, Anthony and Vinton's would be this much. So that way we can get a better idea of, and they can see if whether or not this is something feasible within their budgets. What then might be, the easiest route at that point is for then the governments to form the local government corporation. And if there is a willingness to partner with Sun Metro to have a seamless regional transit system, then perhaps then that local government corporation, which would comprise the city and the other municipalities, can then perhaps partner with Sun Metro where the level of service is then increased. And that would keep the existing structures of governance in place, but would enhance the levels of service. But I do want to emphasize what was said previously. The majority of folks who live in Horizon are El Paso's workforce. The majority of folks who live in Socorro are El Paso's workforce. The students who local university students are going to community college or they're going to UTEP. So having a regional transit system benefits our region. I intend to meet with John Barella at Borderplex to emphasize this because as we as we go and promote El Paso to to businesses prospectively locating here in our community, the fact that we don't have a regional transit system that you can't get from Anthony to Tornillo without taking 3 or 4 hours on public transit, I think is a significant problem. But here in El Paso, we have a lot of potentials as well because depending on the structure and how this is organized, we can have transit go through Juarez, we can have transit go through Las Cruces, as some of the services already provided, but there's just tremendous potential with this. And again, this is very preliminary. We're looking forward to their final presentation. And then again, we're looking at the possibility of expanding the contract so we can dive a little further into the financial details.
Okay. So we have Representative Ortega.
It's actually kind of interesting to hear that this was a process that commenced 2 years ago where you asked for this study to take place. What is kind of like how much longer is the process going to take, and what would be the time period to decide as to what action to take?
Sure. I think a lot of that will depend on the local municipalities' funding ability to pay for service. So so let's say if we decide to do this for fiscal year 19, so we're currently in fiscal year 18. And the municipalities are able to, and TTI is able to identify, okay, for San Elisario, their allocation would be theoretically this amount, for Socorro would be this amount, then it would really depend heavily on their ability to provide that. If they're able to provide that for fiscal year 19, then I would expect that this is something that can be started relatively quickly. If we do the local government corporation route, and if the county commits funds. Now keep in mind the county has a large swath of an incorporated area. So we have everything, we have all the MUDs that are very densely populated. They are not located in a municipality that's in between Loop 375 and Horizon City. That is very, very densely populated, but there are no bus routes at all providing service. And really, when I look at a lot of those neighborhoods, they seem seamless from the city of El Paso. You really can't distinguish them aside from the services that are provided to them. The county would ultimately be responsible for unincorporated areas such as that, unincorporated areas such as Montana Vista, Fabens, Tornillo. And so it just depends on how quickly we can get those numbers and the funding availability.
So is there anybody hasn't come in yet, Mr. Marcos?
Yeah, my question is about paratransit. You only have it as number 4. Is that included on any of the other options?
ADA paratransit, which is required for fixed route service within 3/4 mile for persons with disabilities who are eligible under the ADA. There are other options. The general demand response in the rural areas of the county is for everybody, and it is curb-to-curb demand response requests, so it would meet the needs of individuals with disabilities. And also the flex routes are intended to provide that the benefits of the fixed routes with the ability to flex for any individual, but particularly for individuals who may have physical limits on accessing the fixed routes. So there is an element of accessibility for individuals with disabilities in all the service options. But the ADA paratransit complementary service is only in scenario 4.
So we'll go back. Dr. No, did you have a follow-up?
Just a clarification. You had mentioned, I believe, I just want to make sure I'm clear on it, that the current funding right now is around 4.2 million?
That's correct.
For the status quo of what we've got in the
That's correct.
county right now. And that I believe your way of representing this on your presentation is with a dollar sign. Each dollar sign being 4.2 million?
Each is about 2 million.
Okay. 'Cause
Yeah.
I thought that they
Yeah.
were each increments of that 4.2 million.
So the current service, the dollar signs are 2, and so it's representing 4 million, and each
So
dollar
it-
signs
I
represents
guess just
2.
to go straight to the point then, instead of $4 signs, what is that equal to?
It's a little under $8 million estimated total cost, total operating cost.
And that's additional or total?
That's total, annual.
annual.
Yes, annual. And that is before fares are applied or any other federal or state source of
Right, that's
funding.
just the cost.
It's the total operating cost. And that's the same as the 4.2 current service. That's total operating cost before sources of revenue are applied.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have something on that point? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's fine. If you look on the maps provided, it does provide the cost of each scenario. So for example, on slide 6, scenario 3, which could be a viable option. The annual operating cost is 6.9 million, compared to the current service cost of 4.2. So you'd be looking at little under $3 million and again that would be split between the county and all of the outlying municipalities outside the city.
Well, if we went to option number 5, right? But you couldn't really split it because of the sales tax right now.
No, I don't think any of the options are dependent on the governance. Right?
No, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Every one of these scenarios is independent of any governance option. The county could do this now in interlocal agreements with the other cities. They could look at a countywide authority or a countywide local government corporation. These scenarios, service scenarios, do not depend upon the governance. And it's also a point to be made, I think that these are good service designs about how you would approach regional transit in the county in any case, because it's feeding the transfer centers and the high-capacity BRIO routes, which provide more frequent service, faster service, and it's investing the service for the communities to get them to transfer centers to access multiple destinations and faster service.
Okay.
And so it's a good design under any governance option.
I guess you were just saying that we would go out to the municipalities and see what they would ask for and what they would be able to contribute to it, but in paying for it, the options that they don't have at this point is through a sales tax.
No, they could do it through their local budgeting process. For example, community development block grants federal dollars can be used to support transit.
But that's not a sales tax.
No, that's not a sales tax. Now, a local sales tax may contribute to the general revenue, which sales tax and property taxes are common, most of the revenues in the general fund. Okay. And so a city could agree that they will identify a portion of the general fund to support transit. Okay. Or they could say, we would like to set aside a third of our municipal tax penny and budget it each year to fund transit. And that could be a way that they could do it as well. And so there are a number of different options, and that's what we would like to talk to each of the cities about, because it depends on the city.
Have you approached the various communities to see their level of interest in this and their ability to be involved in it?
Not yet, Representative. That was the, I mean, this is the purpose of today's presentation. The Commissioners Court just received the presentation yesterday. So this is, we just literally got this information. I sent an email to Mayor Margot and to City Manager Gonzalez this morning regarding that. And so if there is an interest from the cities, and again, you know, we're gonna have to get creative on the funding side. If there are probably, like I said, some municipalities, Horizon, Socorro, because of the Emergency Services District and other things, are gonna likely try to have to, if they are interested in this service, have to come up with funding from their general fund. Ideally, you know, the partnership that I envision with Sun Metro would be would sort of have you know, right now we have two different I mean, you know, the good thing is that First Transit is both the operator for both the city and for the county. But you have two different buses. You know, if you're outside the city limits of El Paso, you take one type of bus. If you're inside, you take another type. Again, I'd like to, I mean, I envision something like I said, at Capital Metro, Houston Metro, Dart and Austin, or in Dallas, where they all sort of have the same, you know, look, the same feel, where it's kind of, you know, so it may not function that way from a governance perspective, but hopefully we'll have interlocals in place that can perhaps provide our region, you know, with a unified regional transit system.
Okay. I guess I was just wondering if any of the municipalities have had
Well,
any contact yet or not.
The cities are included in our stakeholders, and they have, we've had good participation from several of the cities, and they participated in the discussions yesterday, and we hope to build upon those relationships with the stakeholders.
Okay. Thank you.
I've had some folks that haven't commented yet. Still one, Judge.
Just a very quick comment. What PTI has done in the study is evaluate where we are receiving state and federal funds now. So although for example, scenario 5 is at 7.6 million annual operating cost, that would be reduced or offset by some of those state and federal funds. They've also looked at where we're not bringing in some money that we could look at tapping into, and so that would also offset that cost. So it would be reduced. I think right now our share for our current system is about 200,000 a year.
That's correct.
And so the number does look large, but I think we can bring in some additional funds to help offset that cost. Yeah.
Representative.
Thank you for the presentation. I am very excited about the preliminary results, and I would love to help. And this is just me speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of the city. I would love to help champion this, and so Commissioner Pettis and Judge Vogt, I think it would be beneficial for you all to consider looking into the details as it relates to the board foundation in terms of who's responsible for funding, what those interlocal agreements would look like, because I think those are the missing pieces that would help the municipalities make really strategic decisions. But I think that this is the vision that most of us have. We need to look forward as to what we're going to do to help transit, and so I just wanted to thank you for your leadership on this.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for me. You know, like again, you know, Borderplex really likes to emphasize, you know, that we are one region, and you know, there's a lot of things that are out of our control, whether it be MSAs, you know, for census purposes and things like that. But you know, it's surprising that a community of our size doesn't yet have a cohesive and again seamless regional transit system. So I am very excited. I share your excitement in the prospect of this, because this is something that is within our control. It is something that if we are able to collaborate with the communities, if we are able to establish a partnership with Sun Metro and the city of El Paso, then you know, we can, when we promote ourselves to prospective businesses that are interested in the community, we can say, you know what, we have a workforce here in Horizon that can very easily get to work in the city of El Paso. We have a workforce at Socorro. We have students that can easily get to you know, to school at UTEP or at community college. So it is a very exciting endeavor. So I look forward to working with each one of the representatives, you know, and each one of the stakeholders here.
I just want to make a comment. Representative Swearsbine asked about when this came about. In '97, it was a different time, and there had been elections in the past to have a countywide transit authority, and they failed. And the city picked up on it and went ahead and passed that half-cent sales tax. And we looked at this as a city council member in the past. You could ask for legislative relief and change 457, and kind of going on what Commissioner Pettis was talking about. It doesn't have to necessarily be sales tax. It could be sales tax and or the equivalent. change the makeup of the governing board, because currently 457 says it's 7 members. It's 2 from the county, 4 from the major municipality, and then 1 member representing the other municipalities. And obviously, you would probably want to change that. So you could, based on what you come out with, do that, because what Commissioner Bettis is recommending is, well, if you can't use your half-cent sales tax because you're at your cap. If you get a commitment from that municipality for the equivalent general revenue. So it could be changed to do all of those things, but this is gonna have to be, I'm just my opinion, be driven by the county. I mean, it's gonna be a county-driven deal to make it work. So, but there's alterations that could be made, but that was just the reason. It was an attempt in '97 to try to pull everybody back together before they hit that 2% cap, because 20 years ago, not everybody was at that 2%. The county was already in the city, the 2 major players, but the others weren't.
Were there other? Senator?
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments made by Commissioner Perez and Mr. Rodriguez, my primo over there. And that's a question of economic development and what this means for economic development. I mean, it seems to me the recent example that we have is, of course, Amazon trying to establish its second headquarters. And as I recall reading in the paper, one of the criteria that they are looking at is what kind of mass transit system does a community have as one of the factors. So I think what Commissioner Perez is exactly right. The economic development aspect of this is something we ought to keep in mind for all of the county, and all of the city, of course, is within the county. So I think it does behoove us to look at this from that kind of perspective. And my question to you was going to be whether or not in this assessment you all assessed what the economic impact would be if you had a countywide mass transit system in place.
We have not engaged in that. We have done similar work in other projects, so we certainly could contribute that as well. We have not yet.
It seems to me that would be very helpful for people to better understand why this is important. It's not just for the students that need to get to UTEP. It's not just for the workforce to get into work in the city. It's really for the whole region and the whole county in terms of its economic development and ability to attract industries such as the Amazons of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're at, yes, Commissioner.
And just to piggyback on that point, I mean, one metric that, again, is provided on the spreadsheets that underneath the costs, if you were to go from current service level to scenario 5, it doubles ridership from the current ridership of 371,000 to 794,000. I mean, that's one possible metric of, just looking at, again, the increased mobility and of having a more effective transit system that's available to more people.
Thank you, Representative Pickett, for that illuminating historical context. Just to sort of, I guess, further clarify from what Senator Rodriguez was saying, I guess my interest and intention with a lot of those comments was just in terms of thinking about this idea is to do it in a way that's smart and intelligent, and not just to build out a line or to build out a system just 'cause, but to really think about how that system or how this proposed idea of a countywide, of a more robust countywide transportation system can really, not just build out infrastructure to do it, but really go and understand the necessity and needs that we have on a regional level. And so that was really kind of where I was coming from in looking at workforce in terms of looking at education and looking at that, so that it's not just done it to go and extend out a Brio or a larger bus, but to really understand what is that impact actually going to be, and what can we do to be as smart and efficient and effective with tax dollars. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Jose Londeros with the county, just to add to a few of the comments that have been made, ranging everything from the legislative statutes that exist to the economic impact. The thing about the county engaging in this practice now today is that we do have the ability to look at other communities who have engaged in best practices, and we can see what's worked and what's not working. A really great example that TTI has shared with the county relates to the Dallas Area Regional Transit, or DART. Mesquite is a city within the county of Dallas that is not in DART service area. They don't have the sales tax that DART requires for their funding district, for their transit district. However, they did form a local government corporation to actually contract service from DART, and the reason why that was done was to ensure that governance issues and financial and fiscal management and oversight and performance metrics were separated from DART. So that way the city of Mesquite could ensure that its funds were being used appropriately and also engage in governance to some extent with DART, and that also allowed DART to allow it to go back to its stakeholders and say, you know what, we have complete buy-in from the city of Mesquite, and the concerns of subsidizing cost outside of the service area are mitigated. And so I think that, as Commissioner Bettis mentioned, there is some room to start to look at it and explore that option. Obviously, it's going to require the participation of the municipalities. But that is why TTI's technical assistance beyond finalizing this report is definitely going to be pivotal, because we can ensure then that we are engaging in those conversations, and we can look to see what worked in DART, what didn't, and hopefully emulate that and bring that to El Paso. So that way the El Paso Mass Transit Board with its municipal transit departments and Metro and whatever is created outside of that can really engage in those conversations about how we can collaborate to provide, ultimately, the most important component of this is the user, the transit user, a seamless experience. And so even though it may be on the back end a piecemealed approach of interlocals and MOUs and contracts and things like that, what matters most is to the user on the front end, that when they get on a bus, it's seamless. And it's seamless from the time that they get on and pay their fare and switch buses and don't have to worry about buying a new fare, that their card is honored on a separate bus, on a new bus, to ensure that they have route transit planning, fare options that are consistent and unique to one system. So that's the ultimate goal, and I think there's a lot of best practices that we can evaluate and hopefully bring to El Paso and to the region.
Was there anybody else? Okay, Commissioner and your staff, I want to thank you for really diving in deep and getting everybody engaged in this, and also the staff at TTI. Thank you for all the work. I know the work isn't over, but I appreciate the work that's gone in over the last couple of years. Can we move to, oh, sorry, we have a public comment on that?
Mr. Rooney withdrew
He
himself
waived.
from.
Anyone else?
No.
No? Okay. Can we move to, oh, sorry, yes. Sure. Can we get, do you need to sign up?
Oh. Oh, no, I'm done.
Okay. We'll go ahead. I think we know you. Yes. We might have your information already.
Mr. Chair, Policy Board, guests here. One of the things that's really important when we look at these plans is not just the transit option, but we also have to look, Scott White, El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. One of the things we have to look at is all the transportation elements out there. What are we doing that is going to facilitate making it people easy to get to transit? We can extend those transit routes by looking at other options. We make it possible for people to walk from where they live, to get on a bike, to make sure that if they have ADA issues, there's a sidewalk that they can use safely that gets them there. Right now, a lot of our land use patterns, the way these rural communities grow out there in the county, there's no governance. They simply grow, they sprawl. We need to be looking at how we can do things to make sure that these communities are strong, resilient, vibrant, and serve the needs of the people who live out there, whether it's incorporated or not. And that means making sure they have access to transit. It also means we need to be looking at changing the way we message things here in this region. We don't need to be talking about making sure everyone can drive everywhere. Not everybody can afford a car. Not everybody wants to afford a car. We want to make sure they have access to good housing. And part of the reason they live out there in these unincorporated areas, out in these other communities, is because there's not affordable housing options for them. So they make that choice. Do I go out there where I can afford cheap housing, where I may not have sidewalks, where I may not have sewer, where I may not have water, or do I buy a car? This is just something to consider as part of that economic plan, that economic impact that's out there. Each car that a family owns costs about $8,000 a year just to own and operate. Not to pay for it, just to own and operate. That is a huge burden on some families. When we talk about transit and making quality of life decisions for these people so they can get to where they need to go, we need to keep that in mind, make sure that they have those options. Let's look at expanding the transit shed, making sure they do have the sidewalks, they do have bike lanes, they do have streets that make them feel good about where they are, even though they may not be in the best situation. We have to look at these kind of decisions, not without the transit or not to the exclusion of the transit, but incorporate everything. These plans can't just be standalone. They have to be seen in the bigger picture of all transportation planning to make sure everybody can get there and get there safely so that they can have the best quality of life that they deserve. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment?
No additional public comment.
Okay. Item 5.
Item number 5 is 2018 New Mexico State Rail Plan Report.
Good morning. See if I can work off the screen here. I'm here to give you an update on the New Mexico 2018 State Rail Plan update. We're in the process. This process began back in May or April of this year with a consultant. We're looking to have a draft plan available next April and a final plan by the end of 2018 completed. Here's a picture of the New Mexico State rail system. The major railroads in the state are BNSF, that's the green line on there, and then Union Pacific, yellow. Significant minor railroads or Class 3 railroads are shown on there, the blue in the southwestern part of the state is Southwestern Railroad. The Texas-New Mexico Railroad running from Lovington down to Monahans in Texas. And then the red and orange in the Albuquerque-Santa Fe area is the railroad that's owned by the New Mexico DOT. New Mexico Rail Runner operates on, and the orange is Santa Fe Southern. They run on track that we own. And then the black route is the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad on the Colorado-New Mexico border. There's a couple of private railroads in the northwestern part of the state that are shown as well. So why are we developing a plan? Well, for one thing, it's required by the PRIA, the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008, for receiving any future funding from FRA. And also it coordinates with New Mexico's long-range transportation and freight plans. So the purpose of a rail plan is one, you want to describe what the state's rail resources are. 2, you need to set forth what the state's policy regarding passenger and freight rail transportation is. And then 3, to present priorities and strategies that would enhance the rail service to benefit the public. And finally, it serves as the basis for any federal or state or local public rail investments. So the contents requirements are, first, we state what the visions, the goals, and the objectives are. This guides our actions, how we do our programming and our prioritization, and provides linkages into the statewide multimodal transportation plans and the specific plans for other modes. We undertake a rail system inventory and assessment, both for freight and passenger, what railroads are out there, how many tracks, what class of operations they have. For passenger rail, where do we have stations, how much service is being offered, even some connectivity to transit that occurs for passenger. What's the performance assessments? How are they operating? What are there issues? Are there bottlenecks that are out there that need to be addressed? Are there passenger areas that aren't being served? What are the issues and the opportunities? We talk to shippers, we talk to railroads, we talk to government entities, the general public, and find out what it is they're looking for. What do they see as areas of opportunities for expansion? And then we want to identify what those current and the future needs are for the rail system. Planning ahead for the future, we want to prioritize what the investments are that we want to put money in, considering things like the economic costs, the environmental impacts of these decisions, and other community factors that benefit rail, and then figure out how we can implement the plans. So the process we're following is first we do stakeholder outreach to determine what the needs, the issues, and the priorities are. We're talking to the railroad, talking to shippers. We've been visiting all the MPOs and the regional transportation planning organizations in New Mexico to present the plan and solicit input. Government entities, transit providers, just find out what their interest is. That's also part of the public involvement. We'll be putting out a draft route plan for public review early next year. Then we'll do a second round of public and stakeholder reviews and comments to get a final rail plan. And then we submit it to the FRA for their acceptance. It's not approval. Originally it was approval. Now the current statutory is they accept our plan for funding. And then statutory, we have to update it every 4 years. So our schedule right now is we're looking towards having the public draft plan available around the 1st of April of next year. Then we'll have it out for public review. We'll do some second round of presentations. We're hoping to have a final plan done around the 1st of October, submit that to FRA, and hopefully have their acceptance of the plan by the end of calendar year 2018. So there's if you want to provide information, we've got email address rail.plan@state.nm.us. That's where you can send us written comments or questions. We'll forward those on, make sure our consultant, which is AECOM, has that information. They can incorporate it into the plan as well. On our website, we have the 2014 plan that we're updating, schedule of these presentations we're undertaking, and there's some additional information about the plan. We had a public survey available online, but we took that down last month. So as I mentioned, this is an update to our 2014 plan. This is a cover of the plan, and I want to kind of go through what we found in the last plan, because that's really what we're starting from in developing the update for 2018. So the vision in 2014 was that the state of New Mexico's vision for its rail network is a fully integrated and safe multimodal rail system that provides efficient passenger services to, from, and within the state, provides a competitive option for New Mexico shippers, is a vital component of the national transportation network, and supports sustainable, inclusive economic development statewide. The 4 main goals that were identified in the 2014 plan were to support economic growth and development, to improve railroad safety and security, to maintain the railroad assets of the state in a state of good repair, and to promote efficient passenger rail service. Under the first goal, economic growth and development, we wanted to increase the capacity of long-distance freight corridors. BNSF was working at the time to complete double tracking the Transcon line through New Mexico. That's now completed. Union Pacific is doing some improvements on their major line also, and BNSF had some improvements they were doing on the line from El Paso to Belen. Promoting local freight connections. What we found in talking to people throughout the state and in the rural and the urban areas was a lot of concerns about getting local service. So we were trying to figure out ways to get more of the railroads to have sidings, to have spurs, so that the local businesses can get access to rail. Promoting rail-related tourism. We've got Amtrak in the state. We've got the Southwest Chief runs through couple of very nice passes, very, very well known for that. We've got the Cumbres and Toltec The rail runner up in Albuquerque and Santa Fe has got some interest nationally. People come here and want to take that train once in a while. And also we want to link our rail investments to strategies that support economic development in New Mexico. The second goal is improving railroad safety and security. Positive train control is a major issue. It was mandated back in 2008. All Class 1 freight roads, BNSF and Union Pacific, plus passenger railroads, that includes Amtrak and the Rail Runner Express, are required to implement this system that will prevent train collisions or derailments at overspeeds or running through red signals or into work zones. That's a federal mandate. It's not funded. Everybody's pretty much struggling to make the 2018 deadline for implementation on that. There's other mandatory safety-related measures that were implemented in 2008 legislation that I'm not going to go through all of those, but those also have to be implemented. Highway rail grade crossing safety. This is an ongoing program funded by FHWA. FRA recently is also providing some money for this. Essentially putting lights and gates in at crossings that are passive, where you've got growth that are increasing the number of conflicts, addressing other engineering issues that have been leading to accidents and fatalities at grade crossings. And then the last item is rail security. This grows out of 9/11. Concerns about the security of our system and the vulnerability of it to attacks and also to threats. So that's an area that there's work being done on. Third goal is we need to maintain the assets that we have in a state of good repair. The Class 3 railroads were identified as having fallen behind on a lot of their capital maintenance needs. Most of the Class 3s were dependent on a single industry primarily. So as you have ups and downs in the economy, if the economy goes down and your railroad's serving, say, oil or copper, you can't really put the investments in there. So a lot of the Class 3s are playing catch up to bring their lines up to speed and up to the capacity of handling the full weights of freight cars. And also on NMRX, that's the Rail Runner line, we need to maintain and improve the conditions on that line. And then promoting efficient rail service, passenger rail service, wanted to improve the options for New Mexico as part of a multimodal transportation system. Give people options other than the car for getting around in New Mexico. Improvements to rail runner operations, and also identifying stable, predictable, long-term funding for rail runner and the NMRX lines. So the stakeholders issues that were identified in 2014 on passenger rail, the three key areas were, the existing rail runner alignment. There was a lot of interest in looking at new or commuter or regional passenger rail. There was also a proposal for high-speed and intercity passenger rail. We wanted to support local economic development, touched on that earlier, grade crossing safety, positive train control, and then the Santa Teresa border crossing, the international rail crossing. There's been a number of studies, and that's moved forward, and a feasibility study came out on that about 2 years ago. Now the next steps are to get a agreement between Chihuahua and New Mexico to move forward to submit a presidential permit for opening that, and there's a lot of work involved in getting that permit prepared. Within this region, the projects that were identified was the Santa Teresa facility that Union Pacific opened in 2014, and they're still expanding and increasing operations there. The Santa Teresa port of entry that I just mentioned, and then there was a proposed El Paso Las Cruces commuter rail line. There was a draft study done of that in 2009. The South Central Regional Transit District just completed a study on that, I think in May of this year. So that's starting to pick up interest again. And let's see, did I skip one here? No, okay. Some of the factors that affect the prioritization. One is the first thing we need to do is maintain what we've got out there. Second is we have to comply with the federal safety mandates. The third one is there's limited overall funding, from both the state and federal and local sources available, so that constrains us on the amount we can spend. The fourth, there's restrictions on the use of the funding. We can't use safety funding for, putting more passenger rail service out there. We can't use money that Rio Metro raises for Rail Runner and put it towards a passenger rail line in Las Cruces or something like that. And lastly, the New Mexico's anti-donation clause is a real strong prohibition. It prevents any kind of donations by any public entity, including counties and municipalities, as well as the state, to private entities, and it explicitly includes railroads. So that very strongly restricts the ability of putting money into any kind of private railroads in New Mexico. So since the 2014 plan was completed, as I noted before, the Santa Teresa facility opened in 2014. BNSF completed the last 3 segments of double tracking in New Mexico. It was Abo Canyon, Fort Sumner, and I think near Vaughn. In the South Valley of Albuquerque, there's several new transload facilities in various stages of being developed. On the Southwest Chief, there was a Tiger grant we received 2 years ago that's work's just being completed on that's improved track speeds for that within New Mexico, eliminated some badly deferred maintenance over several decades. On the BNSF's TranCon, there's 2 major facilities at various stages of development in Gallup and Los Lunas for transload and local service. And then in southeastern New Mexico, associated with the rail boom the oil boom that's been going on down there, there's a number of new rail services being developed there. So we're looking for comments on the overall plan, but specifically we'd like to hear if you want comments on the vision for New Mexico's rail system, what your ideas are about what our priorities and our projects should be for rail, any thoughts you have on funding mechanisms that we can use for supporting rail, and just the overall state policy for rail. And that's the last slide of my comments. So again, the email address for sending us comments are here, and if I'll stand for any questions you may have. Excuse me?
Is that picture up on the Colorado board?
That's on the Amtrak Southwest Chief. I don't know the specific spot. I would guess it's somewhere between Lamy and Colorado though.
Any questions or comments? Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Public comment?
We're almost there. No, what, any public comment? Yes. Now, Mr. Rooney, I think you said, do we have a question? Sorry, Representative Schwarzman.
In terms of the study for the El Paso Las Cruces corridor, where exactly are y'all with that portion? Oh, with Las Cruces to El Paso, with the study for that.
And what was the question, though?
Where's the status?
Oh, there was a feasibility study that was issued by South Central Regional Transit District May or June of this year. The next step beyond that, they basically looked at El Paso to Las Cruces. I think it was 8 stations proposed. Don't hold me to that, but I think it was 8. I think 4 were in Texas and 4 were in New Mexico, going only as far as Las Cruces. They had looked at the spaceport, but decided not to focus on that. They identified costs, potential revenue from it, and now they need to go forward with really identifying funding and taking this further to determine whether this can get built. There are definitely some issues they'll have to overcome, funding being a big one. BNSF owns that railroad. The likelihood of BNSF selling the railroad, which is what happened in Albuquerque for the Rail Runner, is low. It's a much more higher value railroad for BNSF. It's their only real connection to the country of Mexico. So they want to keep control over that. It's a busier railroad in general for freight than the Albuquerque as well, so that's an issue for them. So, and you also have 2 states involved and 2 municipalities, so responsibility, ownership, those would have to be worked out. I know back in 2009, 2010, when the previous draft was done, there were a number of entities in New Mexico that wanted DOT to be the lead on it because we took the lead on Rail Runner. And we had to say, look, we have no ability to work in Texas. We have to work with Texas, and we really turned it over to the Las Cruces and El Paso regions to take the lead on it. And they have, and they've done this feasibility study to move it forward again.
Mike, can you have your staff provide to Representative Schwarzbein I know there's a feasibility study, but also there's reports going back someime now on
Right.
El Paso.
We'll send it off, and there was a presentation by the South Central Regional Transit District a couple months ago.
There's a lot of data out there on it. Do we have any other questions, comments? No? Thank you very much. I appreciate the report. Okay, now, Mr. Rooney, it's public comment time.
Thank you, Mike Rooney. The Rail Runner, New Mexico Rail Runner, that line from Las Cruces to El Paso came up a number of years ago when El Paso was discussing the trolley. As you know, the trolley isn't in operation, so we don't know what kind of performance we're going to get from that. And El Paso went with the trolley at the time. I talked to Jane Shang during that period. I talked to Mayor Cook. And matter of fact, Roy Gilliard, Michael's, the person that had Michael's job, brought the Rail Runner down to the track here and had a big Saturday, I think, show and tell. Mayor Cook told me he would not be a part of it unless they house that thing down here every night. And then he said one of his dilemmas, and he wouldn't approve going with the thing, was Las Cruces didn't have a transit system. Your last item, number 4, you were talking about a county transit system. I think in the range of anywhere from about $6.5 million would help out. He said it didn't make any sense to be a party of it if you sent people up by train to Las Cruces and then they had no place to go because there wasn't transit. Let me give you a way of looking at this thing, kind of Machiavellian or real brutal. I think it was roughly the numbers Jane Shang and Mayor Cook gave me were around $100 million. I think the gentleman that briefed about 6 months ago, I think he said the cost had risen to $150 to $170 million, rough cost. Well, if you divide 25 million into 150 million, that gives you 6 $25 million opportunity slices to use money someplace else. If you divide it by 150 by 20 million, that gives you roughly 7 $20 million opportunities slices. Now, if that's railroad only money, how many bridges could we build across the railroad tracks from the East County to the West County and help open up our lower valley? Or if it's unrestricted, if you divided, 5 million into $150 million, wouldn't the smaller communities out Socorro, Anthony, Vinton, San Azario, wouldn't $5 million of extra money be a big help to you? So if they're serious about coming to you and asking for money, I would see, are there other projects here in El Paso that would give us better utility? Representative Pickett, I remember the discussion when New Mexico was asking for our approval, the MPO's approval, to build the Strauss Railroad facility out in New Mexico. And one of your big concerns then was how many jobs will it strip out of El Paso? So please, if this issue comes up, be brutal in how you assess it. I'm sorry.
All right, I think we all have the box checked on brutality, so we're good. Any other public comment?
No other public
I'm
comment.
just letting you all know the next meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. on the 17th of November. We're going to work on providing another educational opportunity prior to that meeting, so keep your schedules open prior to the meeting as well. Thank you for your participation in the robust discussion that we had today. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion and a second move on adjournment. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? This meeting is adjourned. It's 11:42 a.m.